Okay, welcome everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to our first Lunch and Learn of 2026. Still haven't gotten used to saying 2026 yet, but we're already almost 2 weeks in. So we've been in office for at least a week now. Lots of stuff going on last week, so we're kind of ready to go here at the Wine Institute. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about finding agents. And just to clarify, I'm not going to talk a lot. Obviously, I'll probably mention bentonite and carbon, but that's not the focus of today. I think those deserve bentonite, especially in terms of protein stability, deserves its own topic. And carbon, there's just some nuances around carbon that I did not include. Too much or any discussion around carbon. But if that's something you're interested in talking about, please let me know. We can add it to the list. All right, let's jump in. So today we're going to traditionally or talk about the more traditional finding agents and how we can use them in our wines. The first thing I do want to say, though, I'm going to talk about the finding agents in terms of their ingredients. So, talking about things like PVPP or casein or gelatin. Um, a lot of the finding agents these days are branded by whatever manufacturer or whoever's selling them. Um, so, you're not going to find too many places that will call it casein directly. So you're going to have to get into the catalogs, get on the websites, and see what kind of product you need. So it is a little bit of a hunt. But if you know what type of product you want, what ingredients you want, hopefully it'll make it a little bit faster to find those products. Okay, let's jump into this. So, what is fining? Why do we use it? Fining is it's a way that we clarify wine. It's a clarify just meaning we're removing something. So we're adding a reactive material in to selectively remove something that we don't want to remain in the wine. Um, I have to say, in researching this topic and looking up various websites, doing a Google search and that sort of thing, the way people talk about finding and filtration, from a chemistry perspective, really, uh, it 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 annoyed me, let's say. Somebody said that it's a physical removal. No, it's a chemical reaction that's happening. So just keep that in mind, and I will try and talk from a very kind of scientific perspective today. But anyway, we're adding in a reactive material that's going to react with something that's in the wine. This can be very selective. And then typically you're going to allow that to flocculate. Sometimes it flocculates or it floats, let's say, and you would remove the wine underneath. A lot of times, though, it's going to settle to the bottom and you rack the wine off of it. So why are we using fining? It's a very, very old method of clarifying wine. Um, Improve clarity, visual stability, those are some of the major things, but also improving some aroma components, reducing tannin and bitter and astringent components. So there's a lot of different products out there to selectively remove different things uh, from your wines. When does fining make sense? When a specific issue is identified. I did read a post or a blog post or a story today where one winemaker finds every single year. That's no matter what. I would really caution against that. I think you should use fining as a specific method to target a specific issue. Um, and this is why. And I've said this in many, many different situations. You work really hard growing those grapes. It takes an entire season. You pour blood, sweat, tears into the growing of those grapes. You bring them into the winery, you ferment them into a wine, and there's a lot at stake at that point. And then you need to get this wine to bottle. You do want to do as minimal intervention as possible. You don't want to screw things up. You want to keep your wines showcasing that fruit that you grew in the vineyard. And so using fining as a tool if there's something off. Okay? That's how I look at any protocol we might do in the winery. So it's a targeted intervention, and it's most effective when we do bench trials and when we use sensory evaluation and maybe other chemical methods uh, to to evaluate whether or not the fining has worked. Okay. One thing I wanted to talk about, because fining and filtration kind of go hand in hand. Number one, we're doing both probably around the same time in the winery, but also they're both for clarity, stability of your wines. So what's the difference? So fining, you're going to be targeting soluble or insoluble components, but it's a targeted approach. Whereas in filtration, those are insoluble components. We're physically stripping out something that's not soluble. You might not see it, okay? You don't see yeast or bacteria. They're very, very small, microscopic, but they still are insoluble, and we're physically removing them. So fining is a chemical interaction, and high specificity. So that's what you want. Sometimes it's not quite as specific as we want, but it's typically you're adding something in that's only going to react with the component you want to remove. And when I say react, I'm not saying a full chemical reaction, but it's an electrostatic interaction. Okay, there's a chemical interaction between the two components. Filtration, though, can be more efficient in terms of its clarifying effects. Okay, so let's keep moving. How does fining agents work? Through mechanism of adsorption. So this is where I'm saying it's a electrostatic interaction, typically. Adsorption with a D, means that they are interacting at the surface. So if you're putting in a powder, those powder components, each powder molecule, or I don't want to say molecule, but each particle of the powder, whatever you're trying to react, interacts with the exterior. Okay. Absorption is not something we're talking about necessarily with fining, where the component absorption, you can sometimes claim that bentonite is absorption, but I'm not sure if they've fully proven that. Anyway, so there's several different types of chemical interactions possible, just based on the types of components we're trying to remove. Once the complexes are formed, the fining agent and the wine component, they settle out. So like I said, sometimes they float, but they settle out due to them being insoluble or unstable. And then you would remove them by racking or maybe filtration if necessary. Specificity, it depends on the material. An example of that, PVPP is highly selective for phenolics. And I think that's where we see some of the mixtures the mixtures of the different fining agents, is because the companies are getting more and more specific and finding that these mixtures do a better job of fining. You want to match the fining agent to whatever you're trying to remove. And yes, it's based on the chemistry between the two components. Okay. Whoops. Sorry. Okay, so let's jump into a couple of these types of fining agents. So one of the reasons I didn't want to talk about bentonite is bentonite removes protein. that's in the wines, right? It can remove other things too. It can find out other things. But the reason we use it is for protein stability, heat stability. Most of the other, or a lot of the other fining agents are proteins. Okay, so that's why I kind of wanted to separate them out. So there are a number of proteins that we can use that we can add into wine, and they will remove things that we don't want in the wine. So egg white, and you might think, but Aaron, why are we adding proteins? What if they stick around? Um, a lot of these proteins that you're adding are not haze causing proteins. Okay, so I believe I did a protein stability one lunch and learn once. So please go and look that up. Not all proteins cause the hazes that are associated with heat instability. Okay, so the protein-based fining agents I've got on this slide here are all animal-based. Okay, egg white, casein, which is milk protein, gelatin, which comes from a number of animal sources, and isinglass comes from fish. And so this table, we've got a couple of common uses. I know tables aren't great, but this will be up on YouTube and you can pause it and read the tables um, at your leisure when it gets posted. But as you can see, most of these proteins are going to interact with phenolics and tannins. We know that that interaction happens. How do we know that interaction happens? When you feel astringency on your tongue, that is your saliva proteins interacting with the tannins that are in the wine. That's what causes astringency. We also know this because of a lot of the research our group has worked on in the past couple of years that we don't have a lot of tannins in some of our hybrid wines because there's quite a bit of protein in there. There's some interactions going on. So, we're going to use these proteins for finding out some of those phenolics. So, bitterness. So, I know you might say, Aaron, we don't have very much phenolic or tannins in our wine. We talk about that all the time. We don't, but you may have some bitterness, which can be due to other types of phenolics. You might have some browning as well. Or maybe you're bringing in wine from or juice from a warmer climate, and you might have over an excess amount of tannins that you do want to soften out. So there's a possibility that we would want to be finding out tannins or phenolics. Um, okay, the one thing I'm gonna say here that I'll probably bring up again. There are some customers these days that are concerned about whether their wines are vegetarian, vegan, allergen type labeling. And so it would be good, I would at least say educate your tasting room staff if you do use these types of animal-based proteins. Um, Maybe not something that you absolutely have to put on the bottle. It's not required at this point, but you may want to let your tasting room staff know, hey, this is not considered a vegan wine, because some consumers may be asking that. Okay. There's another set of proteins that come from plant-based materials. So pea protein, potato protein, or wheat protein are available. And so again, phenolics, astringency, that we are finding out. Proteins react with phenolics. That's a very well established, and how you go about that and the efficacy of these products is going to differ. But that's why I say there's lots of these blends or mixtures out there, and they have various names. And so you could definitely check those out and see which ones are going to be most effective for your wine, especially let's say if you want to retain color. Okay, which one of these are you going to use that's going to retain the best color but reduce your bitterness? And things like that. You really want to target the browning that you see. Which one of these is going to be best for that? Because it may be a mixture of some of these that the companies have already developed these mixtures. Okay, again, there's some, some of these are vegan friendly, but they may have reduced selectivity. So you need to be careful. Bench trials. I will come back to bench trials in a bit, but bench trials. You need to be doing bench trials to see what dosage you need to be adding and if you're getting the effect that you want. Okay, the last classification of these, and again, we're mostly looking at brown or at phenolic fining at this for these and for this presentation, really. But some of these can also be used for reducing green aroma and or other types of aromas. I don't actually mention copper either in this presentation, and using copper to remove some reductive aromas or H2S. That's really what it's going to remove, or some of the more simple thiols is possible as well. So but some of the ones on this slide here are synthetic materials. And so PVPP, polyvinyl polypyrrolidine. It's a white powder. It's very selective and very effective in whites and rosés for some oxidized phenolics. So you could be cleaning up some bruised apple, or maybe not bruised apple, but certain aromas, but definitely bitterness or browning. Silica sol. So these we can use to, it's often paired with other components to do some protein removal. And I said I didn't really want to talk about protein removal, but just know that silica sol is also out there. And then chitosan is derived from mushrooms or shellfish. And it can be used for microbial control, and help to reduce hazes that are produced because of excess, yeast maybe floating around, especially maybe if you didn't want to use filtration. Chitosan might be an option for you. So again, be careful with some of these in terms of your labeling. PVPP is a synthetic product. Again, maybe not something that you want to be labeling at this point, but you may want to let your tasting room staff know what kinds of additions. And this is actually another kind of debate. And I'm not sure where we'll land in terms of labeling of ingredients, because that's all still up in the air. And I'd be honest, I'm not sure well, there's another slide I have that talks a little bit about maybe what the EU is requiring. But if a material is removed after the fining, so let's say you do add in, well, let's just say the egg white. If the egg white settles to the bottom and you rack the wine off and there is no detectable, or, I mean, I'm not sure of anybody really doing the testing anyway, but if it's removed, does it need to be included on an ingredient list? There's some debate. Yeah, I'm not so sure. Just something to keep in mind as the labeling discussions for labeling continue, and what if we're going to be required to do nutritional labeling or ingredient labeling or allergen labeling, what will we be required? So, choosing the right fining agent. You want to identify your issue. This is the main thing. If you think something is off, identifying what it is or what it is that's off. You may think there's something off, but I don't know what it is. Get other people. A lot of people send me samples and say there's something off. I don't know what it is. And I'm happy to, take a quick look, or take a quick taste. But definitely, you don't have to do this in a bubble, in just by yourself. Avoid routine fining without a goal. There are some winemakers out there that have a very defined recipe, my recommendation is to avoid routine fining without a goal. Is that only use fining and only make additions of things if you have a specific goal in mind. Use sensory and analytical data to see if, I'll talk a little bit about bench trials in the next slide. Match the target to whatever match the finding agent to the target that you're trying to improve. So if you want to do browning or oxidative phenolics, and also depending on what kind of product you might want to use. Budget might come in at this point as well. There could be a number of things that are specific for your winery dosage in terms of how large of a batch are you doing. Um, so yeah, there's different considerations to make when you are picking what finding agent you're going to use. Consider your wine style and your timing. So white, rosé, and red wines might respond differently. You might have to leave them in contact for longer periods of time, depending on what style of wine you're making. Earlier fining, I think you're going to get better reactivity, but you could react with more wine components. Wine components are a little more uh, unstable, let's say, in those earlier days of post-fermentation. So if you decide to do your fining very early, you may strip out some other things. Not always. I mean, again, this is why bench trials are really, really a good idea. Pre-bottling, fining requires extra caution. Again, you're right up until the bottling. You've worked really hard on those wines. You do not want to do anything that's going to throw off your aromas, and also you don't really have the time to see if the equilibrium, let's say, will bring the wine back to where you want. So just be very careful of that pre-bottle fining. Account for some practical constraints, labeling and allergen considerations. Just, know that you should at least think about them. Vegan and vegetarian claims. And then do you have enough time for your settling and your racking and all of the other steps that you do need to do? Organization and time management is necessary as winemakers. We kind of get in the okay, post fermentation, we can all take a breather, and I'm guilty of it myself. I still have a lot of winemaking to do before April when I usually bottle, and kind of push some of it back, and I need to get on it. Okay, bench trials. Why do bench trials matter? So first of all, there is a link here, and I'll make sure it's in the YouTube comments section as well. But they go through, it's a video of them going through how to set up a bench trial. There is a really good post underneath it of what kinds of calculations and the considerations you need to do when you're setting up a bench trial. So what is a bench trial? First of all, later on this year, I do want to do a lunch and learn on bench trials, and I'm going to go through, start, uh, from the beginning, how to set up a bench trial. And we usually do bench trials, yes, on bentonite fining, but you can do it's the same procedure overall. So it's a small scale test of one or more additions, okay? If you want to do fining, but if you want to do an acid addition, if you want to do bentonite fining, I wrote fining twice there, sorry. Sugar additions, if you want to blend some wines, do a bench trial, do a small scale trial to make sure that you get the outcome that you want. So you test multiple doses side by side. Make sure that you always have your base wine to compare to. And it minimizes the risk to your entire batch of wine. Okay, so you want to do this again. Got 1,000 liters in the tank. Do you really just want to throw something in and, hope for the best? I wouldn't want to risk your profits and revenue like that. Okay, so why are we doing bench trials? Wines respond differently to the same fining treatment. You all know year to year, the growing season is different. One year it's a hot year and we're in drought. One year it's a wet year. One year it's just hot right at the harvest and the grapes really shriveled. Or one year the acids were sky high. So because of that, there's different amounts of stuff in your grapes and in your wine. And therefore, the wines will react differently to the same fining treatment you may have done last year, may require more, may require less. Bentonite fining is a good example. I know a lot of people end up doing kind of a recipe amount of bentonite that they add to their wines. I will say, having done the test for the last 3 or 4 years, it does fluctuate how much bentonite is required in those wines. And a lot of it has to do, I think, with the growing season. You always want to go with the lowest effective dose. Okay. You want to be adding as minimal amount of stuff to your wine as possible. But you need it to be effective for correcting whatever you're trying to correct. Be cautious of legal limits. So there's just a note about copper. There is a legal limit when it comes to copper additions. Your technical data sheets of any of the products you're buying should tell you what the legal limits are. The other note I would make there is be careful if it's an a European regulation or a US regulation, okay? Because a lot of times the technical data sheets will say that there's, a legal limit, but it might be an EU regulation. So just read carefully. That's my point. Read carefully. What are you evaluating when you set up these bench trials? Well, it depends on what you're trying to find. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. But visual, aroma, palate, finish, I would say even if you're trying to fix a visual, okay, even if you're trying to fix a browning issue, taste it and smell it and make sure that nothing adverse happened in the fining process in those bench trials that goes against what you're trying to achieve and making the wine worse or something like that. So do check what do look for the target. You're trying to reduce browning, or you're trying to improve protein stability, or trying to improve bitterness. But do evaluate those other things as well to make sure that you're not doing something adverse. You may need to do chemistry changes. So if you're doing like a sugar addition, or if you're doing an acid addition, a great person once told me, he's on this call. Drew Horton told me once, when you're going to do an acid addition, and I know this has nothing to do with fining, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. When you're going to do an acid addition, you may use a calculator and figure out, how much acid you need to use to drop your pH to a certain amount. Add in 2/3 to 3/4 of that acid amount and see how the wine reacts. Because sometimes the buffering capacity and whatnot is a little wonky. And then, so that's kind of like well, it's not really a bench trial, but it's it's a little tidbit. If you're going to need to add acid, 2/3 to 3/4 of the amount, see what the pH change comes out to, and see if you need to add that full amount of acid. So, and that's kind of what you're doing in the bench trial too, right? Is you're trying different amounts to see, even if you think like, oh, I bet I need to add this amount, test lower and higher to make sure that with less, or to see if adding a little bit more gets you a better result. Okay, and then what are you evaluating? Does it solve the problem? Okay, sensory and quality impacts, things you need to look for. So again, yes, does it solve the problem, the key problem that you were trying to target, but then evaluating those other things. So are you reducing aroma, intensity, or complexity? And there may be a threshold for that. Yes, it reduces it a little bit, but I'm okay with that because it corrects the problem. It's your choice. Changes in flavor, balance, or perception. These are just things, again, there's no right or wrong. It's just what are you willing to tolerate? Loss of color, shifts in color hue, improved brilliance over stripping, depending on how clear you want your wine. And that's because while I say fining is very specific, we're targeting a specific wine component. Um, there is non-selective binding. Okay, there is things that the fining agent will probably react with that you don't anticipate or you can't control necessarily. Um, how do we manage this? Again, we do our bench trials. We use the lowest effective dose, and we do also, once you do your fining in the large tank, go back and retaste, reevaluate after settling and racking. Don't just assume that what happened in the small bench trial exactly happens. Always a good idea to reevaluate just in case. I mean, I would hate for you to have to do anything more to the wine, but always a good idea to double check. It doesn't cost anything to take. Well, I mean, a little bit of wine, but it really doesn't cost anything to be tasting your wines regularly, especially when they're in tank. Okay. Practical considerations in the cellar. When you get past the bench trial phase and you're actually going to go and you're going to add in your fining agent. Preparation and addition. So reading those manufacturer's instructions, those technical data sheets to see how accurate do your weights need to be or your rehydration. Protocols and dispersion protocols. Do you really want to mix it vigorously or do you want to just pour it over the top and let it settle gently? How much contact time do you need? And avoid, I would say, erring on the side of letting things react a little bit longer. Avoid rushing and racking and monitor your clarity. Considerations. Is there any issues with temperature? If you're going to be at a cold cellar temperature or maybe even a warmer cellar temperature, is there less effectiveness of the product? Does SO2 inhibit the product? Oxygen exposure, or what other previous treatments did you already do that might inhibit the fining capacity or efficacy? Here's a big one that I haven't talked about yet, but I'll hopefully say a couple of times. Fine your wines after you blend them. So if you are going to blend different tanks of wine, different varieties or whatever, whatever it may be, fine your wines after. Now, if that is not possible, if you had to, go in a different direction with a wine and or something, the acetic acid jumps and you need to blend out that wine to lower the acetic acid, but you already fined it. It's fine. It's totally fine, but double check that whatever you find before has not crept back in. A big example of this is protein and cold stability. And so if you take care of those and then you blend, you have two stable wines and you blend those together, the finished wine is not necessarily stable. Again, there's lots of wine components mixing. You need to double check that stability. So same thing with fining. If you add two things together, just double check that you didn't introduce some sort of bitterness or things like that. After fining, you want to rack cleanly and reevaluate and document what you did for future use, or for future reference. The reason I chose this picture, and we're not all working in carboys. Some of us might be for some batches, but when you're racking off after a fining treatment, we're getting to the end And we're doing fining to improve clarity. And a lot of times it might be bitterness, so it might be an aroma or a palate, a flavor type thing, but it might be a visual thing. I would err at this point on the side of leaving more behind when you're racking than taking it all with you. So, for example, post or juice settling. Yeah, I'll take a little, a little bit of the crud goes into your next tank and you inoculate. Got lots of time. Got lots of time to clear that up later. Post fermentation, a little bit of your yeast lees, a little bit goes into the next tank. It's fine. We got lots of time. We're gonna filter. We're gonna bentonite fine. We're gonna do all kinds of other things. At this point, post fining, I would be err on the side of losing a little bit more wine to keep the clarity. So I hope that makes sense. Be careful, though. I mean, you have to make decisions based on what's best for your winery. Okay, jumping back into labeling and practical considerations. So some fining agents are derived from allergen type origin, so egg, milk, fish, wheat, shellfish. Like I said, at the moment there's no requirement. The only labeling requirement in terms of allergens is sulfites. Um, and However, there are customers that will ask you. A good example of this, and it's not necessarily fining, but a lot of people, when we made cider this year, asked us if it was gluten-free. And I think it's probably gluten-free. We did use the brewery canning machine, so I can't guarantee. I do have a test though that and I should have done it, but we sold it at the cider at this point. But I do have a test where I can test gluten um, and other allergens if I needed to. So if that's ever something that you're interested in knowing, is there any residual? Let us know and we can try and help you out. But there were plenty of consumers that did ask us, is your cider gluten free? They don't ask about the wine, but they do ask about the cider, which is interesting. Labeling and claim requirements differ market to market. So I'm guessing most of us are not exporting to the EU. Um, but state to state, I don't know if there's labeling requirements state to state. I mean, the TTB typically handles all of our label claims and label requirements. So, but I will say, let's say you're making a product under 7%. That's where FDA labeling comes into play, and you may be required to put some of these allergens and ingredients on there. So under 7% alcohol, you may be required to put some of these allergen type statements. I did want to make a comment as well in terms of commercial products that a lot of them, the fining agents are mixtures because the company, has figured out a more effective way at doing some of this fining for, again, the lowest doses possible. Therefore, read manufacturer tech sheets and the catalogs very carefully. Consult the sales reps because they know what's in these products. But a lot of them are not going to be called casein or gelatin. You got to kind of get into the catalogs to see what's in some of these products. And this picture at the bottom is this is from the EU, which I think is interesting. And this is how they're labeling some of their allergens, which I guess makes sense because there's lots of different languages and whatnot. So they're using a pictorial labeling graphic. And I just thought it was interesting. It's not required here or anything like that. I just wanted to show you what they are being asked to label. So yeah, I guess be thankful that we don't have to do that yet. We will see. And we will try, I will say at the Institute, we'll try and keep everyone abreast of any changes that we hear of. There was talk about it in 2024 into 2025, but I didn't really hear much towards the end of 2025. If anybody has any comments when we get to the discussion, please feel free to let me know if you've heard anything. So key takeaways, finding is a targeted tool. That's my recommendation. Use it as a targeted tool, not a routine step. Start with the problem and match the finding agent to address it. Bench trials are essential for finding. Again, you're so far along in the winemaking process, you don't want to be um, blindly adding stuff to a large volume. Um, Product composition and labeling matter in terms of effectiveness, but also potentially labeling for your consumers. And I liked this statement, thoughtful finding decisions protect your wine quality, compliance, and consistency. And I like that last statement about consistency. It's something I don't know. It depends on your thought process and your winemaking style. If you are trying to go for consistency, I think we get a pass on that in wine. We don't have to be consistent with the same product year after year after year because of our growing season and because consumers accept that different years will give us different wines. But then there are consumers that want a consistent product. So it's whatever your philosophy is, but we can use finding it. There is an opportunity sometimes to use finding to develop a consistent product.